Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. We're very glad you could join us for this webinar, from hybrid to multi-channel to context-aware computing. And as you can tell from our title, we have a lot to cover. But more importantly, you can also tell we're on a constantly evolving path into the future of mobile application development. But what does that path look like? Where is it taking us? And what do you need to make the journey? I'm your host, Scott Smith, and with us today to answer those questions and more are two of the leading experts on mobile application development, Gartner analyst William Clark and Kony Solutions Chief Technology Officer Sriram Ramanathan. We'll also be joined by Kony platform architect Matthew Terry, who will show us the Kony solution in action. And we also want to take action on questions from you, our audience, so please enter a query for our speakers at any time. And we also invite you to answer our survey at the conclusion of this program. So with all that to get to, let's welcome William Clark to the program. Bill is a Vice President for Mobile and Client Computing Research at Gartner. And Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome to our session on the future direction of mobile application development, from hybrid to multi-channel to context-aware. My name is William Clark. I'm a Research Vice President at Gartner, and we'd like to share with you our thoughts on how mobile application is going to change over the coming years. First, let's start with a look at the state of the art today. So in this particular slide, what we did was we looked at the relative cost and complexity of various approaches of creating mobile applications, and we plotted that against the quality of the user experience. Now, there's a really interesting, I'll call it fault line here, that's drawn in the red between native and web. And first of all, we call it a fault line in that that's really where you get into more expensive licensing propositions above that, where the sweet spot for a lot of those tools, the proposition for the tools and the approaches above that, is that they can all generate native applications. They're targeted towards that. And they're increasingly starting to move towards that fault line where they can also do web. And then likewise, the web approach, especially the rich internet application approaches, they're also finding a bit of a gravitational pull to support native. And that makes for a very interesting dynamic in the marketplace. And I'll get into that in future slides. Now, it's important before we dig deeper into the evolution of the various approaches to mobile application development to take a look at the big picture. What's going on in application development in the large. And what Gartner thinks is that we're going through, from now until 2017, the reinvention of application development. We think that delivery fragmentation, rising user experience expectations are going to put application development on a critical path. And we're certainly seeing that in some of the surveys that we're getting back from our CIOs. Now, what are some of the things that are feeding into this? And the way we've depicted it here is really a storyline in that it begins with consumerization of IT in general. It definitely is fueled by the rapid adoption of mobile devices. It's also triggered by cloud computing. So the notion even of what is an application, where is an application runtime being executed, is being challenged by cloud computing. It's being further refined by context-aware user experiences. The bar is going up there. Tool and platform convergence from a delivery point of view. Multi-channel, this notion that it's not just mobile is about smartphones and tablets, but now it's about gaming platforms like Xboxes, widgets on televisions, of course widgets on PCs, being able to create experiences that morph across these. Even integration, we've seen integration in the past between Ford and Microsoft in automobiles. We expect more and more of that. And where it finally ends up in 2017, 2018, we believe, is that there will be new languages, new tools that will allow users to more elegantly design what we call ensemble interactions. So that's your smartphone automatically knowing the content that you were viewing on your TV, and your car knowing the content that you were just streaming on your PC. So when you get into the car, that stream is available. It's that kind of interaction that we see coming around the corner. So it's not just within mobile, it's an overall reinvention of application development that's going to set a new bar in terms of where IT is going. Now, probably the most frequently asked question around the roadmap for application development is, what about HTML5? Tell us about HTML5. So first, let's set the table for what HTML5 is. The first thing is it's a very widely supported standard. All of the major smartphone operating system manufacturers now have WebKit-based browsers, and also the desktop browser manufacturers are supporting it as well. So it's been a great unifying force in the industry. Now, included in it are things like rich media, the ability to do some very fine-grained graphics within a browser that previously were the exclusive capability of a native application. Very importantly for mobile, you have local storage, you have access to some geolocation capabilities, you have some advanced threading capabilities, so the applications can be very sophisticated. And mobile is having a much greater influence in the thinking around HTML5. Now, one thing that I'll say about HTML5, it's used so much that really the correct term is the modern web, because it's actually a set of several dozen specifications. HTML5 just tends to be the one that's cited most often. The three most influential pieces of the equation are HTML5, CSS3, which is the cascading style sheets that allow you to adapt to different devices, and then from a business logic point of view, the JavaScript capability. So another very common question around HTML5 is, what are the possible outcomes? HTML5 is a great rallying point for mobile application development and web development, but where's it going? So on this chart, we plotted out three possible outcomes through the end of 2013. The first possible scenario is the web just keeps marching on. And if you believe that, we have a probability of 0.5 on that. If you believe that, then you should design for web browsers first. If you need to develop something that's very unique, do it outside the web development that you do. And then you have a trade-off between reach and richness within your web development strategy. You can, of course, expect proprietary innovation from the browser manufacturers. They're always trying to embrace and extend and come up with the secret sauce that makes their web experience better than the next guy's. Now, the second scenario with a probability of 0.3 is what we refer to as HTML Hell 2.0. And what that means is that we all think back to the days where the HTML implementations really got far apart. And you can expect incompatible browser implementations. You can find features that are very poorly standardized across browsers. The use in the tool side of things of proprietary cross-platform technologies that link you in. And in that scenario, probably the ugliest scenario here, you only fall back to browsers when cost requires it. It goes back to the thinking that the user experience will decay somewhat in the next couple of years, and native will have a stronger piece of the future. And then the last scenario with a probability of 0.2 is what we call standards utopia, which says the browser, the standards bodies are able to overcome some shortcomings, but you get to a point where you can design everything for the web browser, expect universal web compatibility. This will put all of the cross-platform technologies out of business, and you only go native when it's absolutely necessary. It really would pigeonhole native application development as a very niche skill set in the coming years. So we often get the question, will HTML5 overtake native mobile applications? And our answer to that is that we think by 2015, half the applications that today would be written as a native mobile application will be delivered as a mobile web app. Now, the drivers for that is that HTML5 will mature further by then. Also, as it evolves, we'll gain more access to more native platform services, so the gap between native application experiences and web application experiences will go down. And also that the number of mobile development tools that offer HTML5 generation will increase. So in other words, HTML5 is just another checkbox. Yes, we can do that, and because of some of the other aspects of HTML5, it will take off. Also, the quality, usability, and performance of the browsers will continue to grow. So it's not just that the spec will grow, but the implementations will move with it. And also, a very important element of this thinking is that there's a much larger pool of web developers, that if you look over the next 3 years, a lot of developers will be making career decisions. And staying close to HTML5 and the modern web will be a way of them protecting their interest of their careers. Now, what are some things that could cause this prediction to go awry? The first piece is that native applications and platforms will advance so fast that HTML5 won't be able to create competitive applications. So Apple will just keep plugging away and giving capabilities that are hard to replicate in a web app. The second point on this chart, network performance and latency, this is a very, very important consideration, and this could end up being the most important roadblock to this prediction coming true. And that is, if you take into consideration that the installed base of smartphones is going to triple over the next 3 years, the installed base of tablets is going to triple worldwide over the next 3 years, and the fact that many of the networks are reaching capacity under 3G, and they need to build out their 4G capabilities. It makes for really an interesting interlude where the overall demand of networking capability from mobile applications is going to outstrip supply. And unfortunately for web-oriented applications, they can need more of that network bandwidth than a native application. Now, we've talked a bit in this presentation around context awareness. So in this section, I'd like to dig deeper into what Gartner means around context awareness. First of all, context aware, you can say it's kind of the Internet of Things. And there's an evolution towards this. You have device-centric development from 2000, that kind of thinking, to the kind of platform-centric development that we're using today. So today's orientation is, we're targeting mobile web, we're targeting HTML5, or we're targeting the Apple iOS family of devices. It's all about the platform. Now, in 2020, we think that will evolve into multi-channel development, and we have some instances that give you some examples that give you an idea of that. So the first example here is an example of Cinemax, where they actually have content that is rendered across smartphones, tablets, PCs, and televisions. Another example is this example of the iBar. So this is actually a bar that detects where various objects, it's kind of a social thing, it's kind of a cool thing to immerse you and your friends in this environment. And the bar tells you different things. The applications running give you a different experience according to what's going on, what's being served on the table, etc. Another interesting example here from Beijing, this is an example of a context-aware area that you can walk. So the actual artwork will change as you walk through it, the artwork that's on the ground. So these are the kinds of things that we're seeing that are getting developers to think outside the box, to think how things can be connected in a context-aware kind of way. Now, context-aware opportunities come in a lot of different forms. So in this slide, what we've done is we've looked at various kinds of objects that you run into, point-of-sale terminals, kiosks, automatic teller machines, electronic signage, and there in the middle, we've kind of grouped a set of devices that are a little bit special in the sense that in many cases there's a one-to-one correlation between a person and this collection of devices. And those devices are smartphones, tablets, PCs, and your credit card as examples. Now, the idea here is that little cloud, that personal bubble, and if you were talking to someone from Apple, they might say it's the iCloud thing, that's following you around, and you're interacting with all these various things in your life. And on the right-hand side, you see cars, televisions, interactive surfaces, game platforms. And the idea here is, where do you find the ideas? Where do you find the innovation? So what we've listed on here is some examples, some vendors that we find that already have innovated in the space, that actually have production applications out there. So one that I'll pick on here is the electronic signage. Companies like Harris and Cisco now have an ability to analyze digital video streams, and they can change all the signage in an area based on the context awareness of the analysis of the people. So for example, if you are in London in the underground and Manchester United is in town that day playing a soccer match, you can actually analyze the crowd and see that they're wearing Manchester United uniforms on this particular escalator. So let's change all the ads in that area to Manchester U, and maybe outside another part of the stadium, the crowd is primarily Liverpool. So in real time, the signage will change according to the people who are around. Now, the extension to that to mobile application development is there can also be an opportunity there to do proximity-based texting, to send certain offers to people based on where they are in the grand scheme of things. Now, there's all kinds of tie-ins here. Call centers, if someone's having trouble with their smartphone app, why not hand it off gracefully to their call center? Why not pick up the context there? Another element in this evolution from hybrid thinking on mobile applications to multi-channel to context-aware applications is around skills. You're going to require a change in skill sets. And so on this slide, we've listed some important emerging new skill sets that we see in application development. Typically, IT departments have not hired user experience design experts. We think that for many of you that needs to change, or that you need to invest further in your partners in that area. Application store management, paying attention to the app stores. Citizen developer management, can you bring an ecosystem along? Universities are a great example of this, where you have a pool of engineering or software talent, and you need to do things to incent them to write applications that will benefit your general ecosystem. Social application development that goes hand in hand with mobile. Third-party development relations. Cloud application development. Of course, greater expertise in HTML5 and CSS3 and multi-channel application development, gaming, etc., etc. So the bottom line is, if you're going to navigate this, you're going to need to cultivate new skills. And this is timely in that as web developers start to move on in their careers, some of them will matriculate towards mobile development, but there may be new roles that you can leverage that will leverage some of their background in creating a win-win situation. So what's your action plan for benefiting from the trends in mobile application development? Number one is, we think that from 2012 to 2015, to center your mobile application strategy to take advantage of both hybrid or container-oriented approaches leveraging HTML5, as well as investigating the use of cross-compilation techniques. What we're really saying there is, it's not just about hybrid, it's the combination of hybrid and cross-compilation that can yield a very good return on investment, lowering your total cost of ownership and giving you an ability to get to market quicker. The second piece in terms of your action plan is to use the business drivers for multi-channel context-aware experiences to create the urgency, the justification for modernizing your mobile AD skills. In other words, look ahead at the second and third steps and realize that you have to get this first step around hybrid right to set yourself up for success in the future. The third action that we recommend is to identify the key application development resources that will accept your mobile application imperatives and help you make it reality. You'll have folks in your AD organization that want to continue to support the legacy, and that's a very important part of the business. Your job is to identify the key resources, and if there's a gap, look outside. The fourth part of an action plan is to survey, segment, and pilot new applications and experiences to set up your transition towards multi-channel. And the last action is to bring this back around and understand the implications of multi-channel and lay in our architectural and tool framework for ensemble interactions in the future. In other words, it's not too soon to learn from areas like multi-channel campaign management in terms of how you would structure your applications. And what we find is often it's not that hard to lay some nice groundwork that your application will be modified in the future to be multi-channel. Sometimes it's as simple as putting an XML wrapper, making things data-driven, where you maybe in the past would have taken different approaches.
Bill, thank you. Bill Clark is a Vice President for Mobile and Client Computing Research at Gartner. And I want to quickly remind you that we'll take questions for our speakers at the end, so please make sure to get yours in. So let's now welcome Sriram Ramanathan, the Chief Technology Officer for Kony Solutions. Sri, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, I appreciate that. It's always an honor to follow Bill Clark. I appreciate the opportunity to do so. The purpose of this presentation is to explain and demonstrate how the Kony platform supports multi-channel development. Now, on this slide, you see an overall representation of the platform where we try to simplify the chaos around multi-channel development using the Kony One platform. So within the Kony One platform, using a single code base, along with our runtime platform, you're able to deploy the same application and get it to run across multiple channels, including phones, tablets, and now desktop web, right? And the runtime platform itself provides a number of other useful capabilities. There's a mobile-optimized transportation layer. There's a set of connectors that you can connect to a variety of backend systems like SAP, Oracle, SharePoint, and other proprietary systems, as well as a number of standard connectors, REST, SOAP, XML-based services, as well as databases. In addition to that, the platform also gives you a comprehensive device database with support for over 9,500 devices, as well as the ability to build intermittently connected applications via our sync server. Let's move along to the next slide, where we show you a view of our IDE itself, right? Within the Kony IDE, which is an Eclipse-based IDE, we give you a widget palette, a form designer that lets you design the form and lay the various widgets from the palette onto the form. And then using our graphical editors, you're able to define and manage all of the events associated with each of the widgets that you drag and drop onto the form. So in addition to doing that, you're able to wire the event all the way back to a service definition and possibly using one of the different connectors that we have, right, and map the data back. For example, if you wanted to XPath a subset of the data coming back from a backend system, you could do all of that graphically as well, and you could build your application that way. Getting to the next slide, this slide describes how we achieve loose coupling in the Kony architecture. In the Kony architecture, when you're designing your application, there is a loose coupling between the different layouts that we support, right? For example, a mobile layout, a tablet layout, and a desktop web layout, as well as the client-side logic that drives these, and the server-side logic and the server-side implementation for each of these channels. So the goal from a Kony perspective to support a new channel is to add a new layout using our IDE, right, and tweak that layout to get the right type of experience, but leverage the same client-side logic and the server-side logic. And that will be kind of the purpose of this demo, and we'll give you an example of how that works in the next slide for a couple of minutes. So with the Kony platform, you can see on the slide how there are 3 separate layouts for mobile, tablet, as well as kiosk and desktop web, right? So we'll show you in our demonstration that follows how we're able to leverage the same backend services and the client-side logic, but actually generate different types of layouts, starting with mobile, then moving to tablet, and then finally coming to kiosk and desktop web. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to our Senior Product Manager, Matthew Terry.
Thank you, Sri. And before we turn it over to Matthew, I wanted to quickly remind our audience that we're taking your questions at the end of the program. So please make sure to get them in for any of our speakers. And now I'll hand it over to Matthew Terry of Kony.
Thank you, Scott. Our demonstration today is designed to show how the Kony One Studio enables a cohesive multi-channel user experience. What we mean by this is the customer experiences the same functionality and has access to the same capabilities regardless of the channel they use to interact with you. This also includes starting their interaction in one channel, such as their desktop browser, but later continuing that interaction on a mobile device, such as a smartphone or a tablet. The way that Kony Studio achieves this is by providing you a tool where you can quickly configure integration components and build your business logic that is then leveraged across channels, even though each channel can have a different presentation. So what I'm showing on my screen now is a basic HTML5 app that was built in a previous webinar that's available on our website for replay. This demonstrates several key capabilities of HTML5 apps, such as location, accessing the user's location from the device. So we click Map My Location, we can retrieve the lat and long from the user's device, we can plot them on a map. We can then call a service to take the lat and long and turn it into a zip code. So currently this application is using a geocode service hosted by Yahoo as a REST service, and we'll show you in the studio shortly how that was configured to be exposed to this particular mobile application, and then we'll show how it can be leveraged across other channels without replicating that business logic. This app also has form transitions, which is typical of HTML5 apps, where you can change different transitions depending on what's happening in the application to give a better user experience. We also have storage, where we can access the device local storage. In this case, we have key value pairs. We can type in a key, type in a value, we can set that value. We can later retrieve it, get back the value that we set, and then the other typical functions of getting keys based on the index, removing a key, clearing all the keys. It's just an example of accessing various functionalities in a particular mobile application. And then we want to show now how we can take an existing mobile app built for this mobile phone and extend it across channel quickly, easily in the Kony Studio, and reusing a lot of the business logic and services that we built across all those channels. So if I flip over to the Kony Studio, this is the development tool used to create the mobile apps, and then you can create different presentations across the channels and reuse a lot of the integration and business logic. So on the left here we have a project. We have a test app project. Like I said, this was previously built quickly to demonstrate functionality. Right now we just have the mobile channel. We have these forms that correlate to the pages we saw in the app. For example, here's the form that handles the map functionality. We have a button for Map My Location. We have a button to call the service to turn that into a zip code. And then we have some labels to display that text. So in the studio we have widgets such as this button, and each widget has a set of properties. As you'll see at the beginning, we have properties that are common across channels. As we scroll down, you start to see channel-specific and device-specific properties, so we can even tweak the functionality and the look and feel for a particular device. So we're not a least common denominator tool. We can take advantage of each and every OS, each and every device, and we can make those tweaks that really give the user a native feel on their device. Even if we are an HTML5 app, it can even use native controls that the user is used to. So in this particular case, if I double click our button, I can pull up the properties here, and I can look and see what's happening when we click that button. So the on-click event, we have an event editor, and we can see that we're calling a geocode service, and then on the callback from that service we can create a mapping. So our mapping editor shows us on the left the data we have access to. In this case, the first thing is our service return, which has a zip code. And then on the right, it shows us everything that we have to set that data to. So in this case, we go down to the label for the zip code, and that label has text. And we've mapped the text of that label to the geocode service.zip, and that's the value that comes back. So all this is done through that mapping editor. We don't have to write code. The Kony Studio gives you these tools to build your services, then map them based on events, and then reuse that functionality across channels. Quickly to show you the services and how that service was created. In the service definition, you can have various different services the tool provides you: web services over SOAP, XML such as REST, Java services, JSON services, composite services where you can call one service and take the value that comes back to call another service. We have out-of-the-box enterprise connectors such as SAP. We have a whole host of other enterprise connectors that are available to you out of the box to get you up and running very quickly. So in this case, we had an XML service for the zip code, and I can quickly show you how this was configured. There's a URL to the Yahoo service, and then some of the parameters that are passed on the URL are the latitude and longitude, so we can turn this into a zip code. So in this case, we just create parameters with a $sign latitude, $sign longitude. In the input parameters, we can name those so we know how to call this service, and we can put in test values so we can even call it in the IDE to test it. So we get a response back. We can see what comes back from this service when we send in this test value. Then for the output parameters, we can use XPath to grab a particular value coming back, such as zip code, and make that available to our application. And then once you configure your XPath here and the variables you want to return, you can even flip over the results, and it'll show you what's going to come back and be exposed to the application. So that's a very quick overview of how you set up services. We have other webinars on the website that you can go and replay and get a little more information. But I think that context is helpful to understand what the app is doing, because this is the representative of the functionality that you'll build into your app once and then reuse across channels. So if we close out of this, we'll go back to our form. And now what we want to do is copy this down to our next channel. So right now we're in mobile. We have these forms. The other channels we have available to us are the tablet channel and the desktop channel. So we want to copy these down to tablet. So what this is going to do is make copies of each of these pages, each of these forms, down to the tablet channel as is. So at least we get a good base to start from, and then we can make changes that are going to be specific to this channel. We can modify the presentation as we like, but all that functionality we built for mobile is now reused in tablet as is, and then we can make the tweaks as needed. So since we're in a different channel, we need to tell it which form to start with, and we're going to go ahead and build it so we can take a look at what we have before we even make any changes. So we do a build. We pull up our build screen. For some of you may not have seen this before, if you haven't seen any of other webinars, but this is our build screen that shows all the different channels, devices, operating systems that you can build to, all the different BlackBerry operating systems and devices that we support. So once you build it once in the Kony One Studio, you can then build the application out to native. So you can create a native binary that can be deployed directly on the device, or over here in the mobile channel, mobile web channel, you can create HTML5 apps. For tablets, you can do the same. You can build native, or you can build mobile web through HTML5. Down here we have desktop, we have kiosk. So in this case we want to build the iPad, because that's what we just created. So this is our build screen. We're only going to check the iPad just to make the build go a little bit faster for us, and then we're going to see what that looks like. So the build runs, compiles out what we need for our HTML5 for iPad. We'll switch back over to our emulator, switch from the iPhone emulator to the iPad emulator. We're going to hit the same URL, and the server is going to use a device repository to realize that we're no longer coming from an iPhone, but we're coming from an iPad, because it's a different experience. This even works with Android tablets versus iPhone tablet or iOS tablets, where we drop you into a version of the site personalized to your device. So we go to our emulator, switch to an iPad. We start our web browser to access our HTML5 application. I've bookmarked the URL, same URL. If you notice, the background image looks a little bit differently, but we have the same functionality at the bottom: our home and our location, our page transitions, and our storage. So if we click on the map, we get the same functionality. We see the map. We can access the user's location, and then we can click the get zip code and turn that into a zip code using the same service, the same functionality. Transitions work the same. The forms have been copied. We could modify these specifically for this channel, leave them as is. Storage works as well. If you notice, these widgets are now being expanded all the way to the edges of the devices. We need to go in and adjust the padding specifically for this form and these widgets because we're in a new channel. We can quickly do that in the IDE. It makes it fairly easy for us to make these changes across all the different forms. So if we go to the, say, storage, for example, and look at our form, we can open up the form. We can see our various containers that need the padding applied, select each one of them, go over to margin, and then for the SPA HTML5 iPad app, we can set percentage padding across those so they don't extend all the way to the edge. Do a quick recompile. Have that built just for our iPad incrementally. So it just changes the files that need to be changed for what we modified. And then once that's complete, we'll flip back over to the iPad, go back, refresh the screen, and we'll see that our storage farm has now respected the new margins we've set to change the presentation. So it's a good example of how you can go in and tweak the presentation for different channels after you copy the functionality across the various channels. So we just want to refresh our main URL, our main app. It'll take us back to the home screen. We go back to the storage. Now we can see that these have now been given a little bit of margin. You can go in there and obviously play around. This is just an example. We can really create some great UIs in this tool, but this is just a quick sample. We can get you more information if you're interested in seeing some of our apps we've done for other customers with some really engaging user experiences on the iOS devices and other Android, BlackBerry, etc. So the next thing we want to show you is to go down and do the same thing for desktop and then show you how that can be tweaked a little bit for that channel in particular. So we do want to start by copying all of our forms down to the desktop. It gives us a good baseline to start from, and it copies all the existing widgets and functionality. And then once again, we'll want to set our startup form as our home screen, because we could in theory create different startup forms for each channel. Now for this home, maybe we'll do something a little bit different. We'll take off this label and we'll want to do something different with this particular home page. If you remember, our iPhone landing page, our iPad landing page, and now our desktop page acted a little bit differently. So this is done through skins. So each widget has the ability to be skinned. So this one has a skin home skin. If we go in and take a look at what that looks like, we've split this skin. We called it forking the skin, and we have a particular skin values for the HTML5 for iPhone, and then the SPA for iPad, and then for desktop. So if you remember, the background images are different. So if you go into the iPhone, we have this particular image set as the background. For iPad, we have a slightly different background image set. But then for desktop, we're going to do something a little bit differently. This skin was set up not to use a background. We just have the background transparent because we want to use our own CSS. So the tool gives you that flexibility. You can import your own CSS here. You can set what you want to. In this case, we're just setting a simple gradient because we're going to drop some content on here specifically for desktop. So if we go back to our desktop form, first thing we want to do is drop our own HTML on the page. You can create the presentation on desktop by using the same widgets just like the other channels, but in desktop sometimes folks want to bring in their own HTML and do something a little bit different. So we do provide that capability. You can put a rich text widget on the page, and then you can set the text of it to any HTML you want to. So in this case, I've created a quick sample HTML that I can copy in. This particular HTML just has inline styles. It just shows an image and some text, and then styles those various components. But it's a quick example of how you can drop in your own CSS, your own HTML into a desktop presentation, but still take advantage of all those backend services. Now the other thing we want to show you is for desktop, our menu needs to be a little bit different. If you remember, on the iPad, we have the app menu at the bottom. Same thing for the iPhone. And where that's configured, if you go into the settings of the project, there's an app menu, and you can set an app menu for mobile, you can set an app menu for tablet, you have the title of the buttons, you have the icons of the buttons, which different devices you may want to render it on. You can make certain tablets, in this case, in this channel, show up, or if you go back to mobile and you click on render, then it shows you all the options you have to either show or hide that button. So a lot of flexibility in the platform, and then once a user clicks that, you can define an event. In this case, the home button just shows the home form. For desktop, we're not going to define that. We're not going to define an app menu because we want to do something a little bit special for desktop because this is a bigger presentation. Users aren't quite as used to a menu at the bottom. They're used to, say, a menu across the top. So just for the sake of time, I created a header that will be reused across the form. And on this header, we created a menu. So we provide you some menu widgets where you can create a menu bar. That menu bar can have some high-level menus, and that menu can have several menu items. So you can build this hierarchy and get fairly complex with your menuing system if you need to. In this case, I've just created a simple menu bar, dropped 4 menus on there because those are the 4 we need: the home, location, transition, and storage. And we use a function just to set the value of these menus. But for skinning them, if we right-click, we can go to the properties and go to the skin. And here we're using CSS to style our menu. So we have this CSS for the overall menu. And then for the individual menu items, what we do is we create a template. And this template allows this Kony One Studio to understand how you want to display each one of your menus. So you can style them differently. Even your submenus could have a different template and therefore a different style. So if we jump down here to the menus, we create a template here. In this case, we're just going to display the text, so it's just a simple label. But the trick here is that if we go into the properties and look at the skin, we have a skin for the normal state, we have a skin for the hover state, and this allows us to go in and set our CSS for what we want to happen on load. And then on hover, we can set separate CSS, slightly different. We're setting a border, so as we hover over, there's a little line under the menu, which we'll get to see here in just a second. So this is the header I created previous to the webinar. Just to save a little bit of time, what we need to do though is apply this header to our forms. We copied them down from the other channel and the forms didn't have a header. So we want to go back to our home, specifically for desktop. We go into the properties, and this is where you define your header and your footer for your form. So in this case we have a header. We'll choose the header that is created. Let's also apply this header because we want to show the map on desktop. And then let's do it for storage as well. You also have your components down here. You can click on this, you can go over to your properties over here on the right and set your values as well. Because if you remember in storage, this is one place where we want to go through and set our padding. And for margins in this case, we'll set some here. So we get a little bit of spacing around the desktop as well. These values can be obviously different than the other channels, so you can customize your presentation, in this case just for desktop. So those are the changes we need. Let's do a build and include desktop. It's asking me to save my changes. We'll include desktop in this build. We can drop the iPad for now. And now we've extended this functionality to yet another channel. Now we'll be able to show this on normal desktop browsers, reusing a lot of that functionality, gaining the ability even to pull up the user's location and then turn that location into a zip code. So we'll switch over to Firefox. I have open. I set the home page to the URL just to bring it up quickly. So this pulls up our desktop web now. As you can see, we have a menu. Different from the app menu, and as you roll over each one of them we get a different style. If we click on location, it flips over to our location, and this is the content on the home page that we set, just HTML from whatever tool you may be comfortable with, or you could have built this directly in Kony Studio. So for location, we have the same functionality to map the user's location. Obviously there's not a GPS in this case in my laptop, but it can use the IP address and determine roughly my location, and then I still get the same get zip code service that'll send in my Latin long, in this case even send back a zip code, a 5+4 version of the zip code. So good demonstration of how we use our existing integration, our existing business logic, copy the presentation down. Now we can show it on classic desktop web, but we have the flexibility to change, say, the way it's presented. We can change our menu. We can reuse storage. Local storage works on the desktop as well. Similar, you can set key value pairs and then retrieve them back. So I hope this gives a quick understanding, kind of what you can do with the Kony One Studio to take functionality that you build once, all of your back-end integration, all of your business logic. Once you get it created in one particular channel, you can quickly roll it out to other channels. And it gives you the ability to interact with your user in different presentations that are optimized for that channel. But because you're reusing the same business logic, you're reusing the same integration, the user can jump between these channels and maintain the same functionality. For example, maybe they're creating a shopping cart. They can put things in their shopping cart on their tablet or their desktop web, and then later when they access it, say through a mobile device, the presentation will be optimized for that channel, but the same cart's going to exist, the same data, they get the same experience. So I'll turn this back over to questions.
Thank you, Matt. And let's now bring Gartner analyst Bill Clark and Kony CTO Sriram Ramanathan back into our conversation, as we've been getting plenty of questions for our speakers. And it looks like we'll only have time for a couple, but fear not. If you do not hear your question answered, someone will reach out to you in the near future. And so, Bill, let me start with you. How important is scalability in designing mobile applications for multi-channel implementations? And how can companies evaluate their scalability requirements and the capabilities of vendors in this space?
Scalability comes in various aspects. So one part of scalability is the ability in the cloud or on the server side, if you will, to be able to react quickly to changes in the user's environment. So scalability is very important in the design from that standpoint. So for example, if I need to push out messages to a user across multi-channels, so let's say it's their Mac and their iPhone and their iPad across various networks, then that kind of determination starts with the back-end system, whether it's web content management or Offer Engine or something like that. But eventually, it has to go through the server-side component of a mobile application implementation, and then through a client side. And so that could be in the form of a text, it could be in the form of a in-app push mechanism. And so it's very important that, especially for business-to-consumer applications where you potentially could be talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users at one time getting these kinds of notifications, it's very important that the design takes into account that kind of scale. So in terms of how companies can evaluate, not only in the consumer area in evaluating vendors, but also in the enterprise, it would be important to understand reference customers. What's the largest reference customer, largest number of simultaneous users or concurrent users of the system, have that spec'd into the expectation of the software license or whatever mechanism you have with the vendor. The other piece is by inspection early on in a procurement or evaluation process, besides a conference room pilot that shows you the look and feel of the application and the ease at which you could modify the business logic in the application. Also run a little bit of a benchmark against that application scaling. Because at this point, we've talked about that the vendors have moved from being adolescent to early mainstream. The middleware and all the plumbing inside the applications should be pretty solid. And so if you ask, could you emulate this? Could you show us 1,000 users using this application? Show us the load on your server. You'll be taking away some risk that perhaps you don't have the sufficient service provision to keep the service running well.
Sri, so let me turn to you for the next one. Can you expand on how these applications integrate with back-end services and data?
So the Kony One platform gives you a broad set of options for connecting to back-end data sources. On one extreme end of the spectrum, you've got enterprises that have a service-oriented architecture strategy and have built out an enterprise service bus that exposes services, right? That are standard SOAP or REST-based services. And we can certainly use our connectors to plug into that. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got enterprises that want their mobile app to actually scrape their existing website. And for that extreme end of the scenario, we've got a scraper tool that's provided as part of our platform that you can use to scrape specific pieces of your existing website and make sure that that data gets transported securely and reliably to and from the mobile. In addition, you've got a lot of enterprises who've got proprietary, backend systems. For example, SAP, SharePoint, Siebel, and other such systems. Some of these systems do expose web services, but we've got a specialized set of connectors that actually let you both discover these services, bind to them, and use them at runtime. So the Kony platform does ship with a comprehensive set of connectors and technology to let you connect to a widest range of backend services and data.
Bill, user profiles seem to be becoming increasingly important in building multi-channel apps. What are the best strategies for assessing and defining user roles and profiles alongside company rules and policies?
So user segmentation is indeed, very, very important. In terms of evaluating, Gartner believes there's really 4 vectors of evaluation that you need to consider. One is how autonomous are the end users? Are they allowed to bring their own devices or not? That's a good starting point. Another aspect is how exactly mobile are they? Are they teleworkers? Are they people who commute, who need maybe some access in an automobile or on public transit? Are they travelers that need disconnected mode while in the air? Are these workers that are visiting a customer who's in a difficult RF environment? So location is a vector along with the autonomy. So another aspect is the exact applications themselves. So what's the suite of applications? What level of access has to be granted for content? What's the nature of the application itself? And then the 4th vector is actually the work styles. So you have some applications, some workers that as a part of their work, they are very forms oriented. So think of people who are maybe checking you out of a rental car company, or someone who's doing rounds in a hospital who has a very structured environment for inputting things. Other folks are more messaging oriented. So if you're a short haul delivery driver, all you really care about is a real simple application where it's essentially an alert. It's telling you, okay, pick up from here, pick up from there. And in some cases, that could just be sufficient to just have a texting application that does that. So there's a very wide range of application usage profiles or work styles that we've identified over the years.
This one is for the Kony team, as your demo certainly drew the attention of our audience. In the demo, you showed an HTML5 app. When you build this for native, are you simply providing a hybrid app, or is it a true native app?
So Matt, let me take this, and then I'll turn this over to you for any additional comments you may have. The strength of the Kony platform is that from the same single code base, we're able to support multiple deployment models and multiple channels. So let me explain a little bit as to what we mean by that. You could, from the same single code base, the demo that Matt just showed, you could generate pure native apps from our build screen. If you go to our build screen, you could generate native apps for both phones and tablets, right? You could also generate what the industry calls hybrid apps, where you're able to put a shell around the app, right? And it's kind of running in a WebKit, and it uses device capabilities via JavaScript. So we've got native wrappers for all the different platforms, so you're able to deploy in that same way as well from the same single code base. With our mixed mode technology, on a form by form basis, you're able to mark a particular form as being natively rendered or as being a dynamic or static HTML5 page, right? So you're able to get the best of both worlds, but go native when you have to, but leverage existing HTML5 and JavaScript that you may have in your enterprise and do it all on your app. And this is, something that only the Kony platform can do effectively. And we've got a context switching API that lets you go back and forth. Matt, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. The one thing to point out there is that the build screen is where you can choose which output you want to create. So you can choose to do purely native or mixed mode. And the power of the mixed mode deployment model is that for certain forms that you choose to be hybrid, it'll pull the content from your application server. So it gives you the ability to make more frequent updates to that functionality, and the apps will automatically pull that in, so you don't have to go through the app resubmission process. But then you also have your native forms where you can access more native functionality on the hardware of the device and get a much deeper user experience.
And I'm afraid with that, we're out of time. Again, if you did not hear your question answered, someone will follow up with you in the near future. So I'd like to again thank Gartner Research Vice President William Clark, Kony CTO Sriram Ramanathan, and Kony Platform Architect Matthew Terry for their insights and advice. A quick program note: Gartner is an impartial independent analyst of the information technology industry. All content provided by other enterprises is expressly the views of those enterprises and the speakers. The information should not be construed as a Gartner endorsement of said enterprises' products or services. And with that, we especially want to thank you, our audience, for your time and interest. You can find out so much more by visiting www.kony.com. That's KONY.com. You can also send an email to sales@kony.com, reach them on Twitter via @Kony, or look them up on Facebook at www.kony.com/Facebook. And a quick reminder that we'd like your feedback, so please fill out the survey that you'll see shortly. Thank you.